啊，呢個可以扮。好衰。哇！成個蚊網。
All those interested in witnessing the firepower of the British Empire, please gather this way. Tous ceux intéressés dans les armes à feu de l'Empire britannique, s'il vous plaît, venez par ici. Arms that we've used here at Fort Henry. So we've had two forts built at this location. The first fort was built during the War of 1812, and then the current fort that we're in right now is built during the 1830s. So over the course of the history of those two forts, these are the firearms we've used. The first one that they would have had here would have been the Brown Bess musket. So the Brown Bess musket, the British military used for over 150 years. So it was used, obviously, a very long time, like I said, over 150 years, because it was very simple to produce and to use. So before the advent of the Brown Bess musket, the long-range piece of implement of war that was used were longbow archers. But of course, you had to train men to be very proficient with a longbow, and that could take years to train them very well. Whereas this, you could train a soldier in a day to operate one of these. So it was much, much easier to train a soldier how to use these effectively. And they were much simpler to produce than the other systems that were out there, such as matchlock systems, because all the way it worked is basically hold the hammer to the half cock. You're going to open this, so this here would normally be closed. This is called the frizzen, and you open it, and then the flash pan is here. And what you'd have is you have a paper cartridge, and you have to bite it off, so you keep the lead ball in your mouth, and then you pour a little bit of the powder off into the flash pan. And so because you have to bite the cartridge open, one of the requirements at the time in the British military is actually that you had to have two teeth that lined up.
Oh.
Of course, back then, a lot of people had, issues with their teeth, so that was a requirement. So yeah, once you put the powder in here, you have to close up the frizzen, and then you had to load it from the muzzle. So you pour the rest of the powder down the barrel, and then you squish up the paper into a wad, put it in, and then you put the ball in, and then you have to ram it all the way down the barrel. So this process, it is time consuming, so you only build a fire about 2 or 3 rounds a minute. The optimal rate would be about 4, but under battlefield conditions, it's more 2 or 3. Usually when soldiers would be firing repeatedly, they wouldn't tend to stick the ramrod back in the rifle. They would just kind of stick it in the ground, so that way when they fire, they have easy access to it. They can just grab it right away. Anyways, once they're done loading it, they can go up to the firing position and pull it to the full cock and go up. Now with this firearm, because you have the powder on the outside, the term sideburns actually comes from basically firing these rifles it's not a rifle, because it's a smooth bore barrel. That's when you'd fire, the flash pan would open, and there'd be a little explosion on the outside here. So you'd have this explosion out here. There's a small hole in the barrel, so the explosion out on the outside here would basically go into the barrel, and then it would ignite the main charge. So normally you'd have a piece of flint, and it was the flint striking the frizzen that caused the spark. And boom, and because your face is up here, so these were very inaccurate. So once you had aimed at the line, most soldiers would just turn their head away, and you'd have the explosion. It would, of course, it could burn the side of your face. So you grew hair on the side of your face. So the sideburn. So that's actually where it comes from. And these are not accurate at all because they're smooth bore, and the barrel is 75 caliber, whereas the shot is only 65 caliber. So there's a big difference between the ball and the barrel, and so the ball will kind of rattle around the barrel as it's going down. So there's a saying that you have to see the whites of your enemy's eyes before you can actually shoot at them, because it was very inaccurate. If I wanted to shoot the door down there, it would be a very difficult target for me. So the maximum range would be about 200 yards, but you'd be lucky if you could hit the side of a barn door at that range. So essentially they needed, the British Army realized they needed to improve on this, so they came up with the Enfield rifle. So the Enfield rifle, as the name suggests, is a rifle neck. So on the inside of the barrel has spiraled grooves, which increase accuracy and range. So this now, it did actually have a conical bullet, but because you still needed to load it from the muzzle, it was still a paper cartridge, so you still had to bite it. but you had to put in the bullet in a specific way. It wasn't just a ball anymore, so you couldn't just drop it in. You did have to put it in a specific way because it did what's called a mini ball, and it had basically a concave base, so a hollow base, and it would expand to the barrel to grip the rifling, which would give it that increased accuracy and range. So this could now fire, the effective range was about 250 yards, the maximum range was up to about 500 yards, so you could shoot much, much farther. And the firing rate was about the same, but in inclement weather it was much better. So with this one, because you had the flash pan on the outside, wind could just blow the powder right off. If it was very windy or if it was raining, the powder could get wet. So it would be, you know, the misfire rate with this was about 1 in every 6 shots, so it wasn't very good. Whereas this one we now use what's called this percussion cap system. So we use a cap filled with mercury fulminate, put it here on the nipple, and then when the hammer strikes the cap, the explosion goes down directly into the barrel. So you don't have to worry about powder being loose in the wind or anything like that. It just goes right down to the barrel. Obviously when you're loading, you know, if it's raining really heavily, you could still get water down the barrel. So there is a chance that you could still misfire from that, but it's much less likely. So the misfire rate was a lot less, but the firing rate was still only about 2 or 3 rounds a minute because you had to put it down the muzzle. Now, shortly after this was produced, the British realized that muzzle loaders were out of date already, so they needed to come up with a new design. So this one was invented in 1853, and like I said, only a few short years later, other nations started developing breech loading technologies. So if any of you are familiar with, you know, the American Civil War, they started using lever action rifles, like the Henry repeater or the Winchester repeater. But for military use, you know, they wanted bigger rounds, so countries started developing, you know, breech systems that were single shot. So basically this is called a Snyder Enfield. It's just a conversion of this. So you can see how similar they are, because all it is, it's literally the exact same rifle, but they cut off the breech here and added this little trap door. So basically there was a competition in 1864 sent out by the British to see who could create the most effective and cheapest way to convert those Enfield rifles into breech loading rifles, because they just spent a lot of money, less than a decade earlier, on these new rifles, so they didn't want to have to buy a whole new rifle. So this only cost 12 shillings each for each conversion. That was only 12 days pay for a soldier, so it was pretty good. Originally it was actually developed by an American. So during the American Civil War, the South used a lot of these P-53 Enfields, and so he tried to go to the Americans first to sell the idea to them, to the South, but they didn't have any money really to buy it, so he came up to Canada, sold it to the British, and so we adopted it in, we won the competition in 1865, and then in 1866 we got these here in Canada. Because of the American Civil War, tensions were very tight between the British and the Americans, and it was thought that that could end badly, so Canadians were actually the first to get this new technology. So basically this is now a center fire rifle, so it uses a modern cartridge that you just slide down into the barrel, close the breech, and we're ready to fire. So now we can fire about 12 times a minute, so much faster. Reloading is just as easy, so you just open the breech, pull out the cartridge. And this, because it's now a self-contained cartridge, has a greater range and accuracy even than the Enfield. So the maximum range for this is actually over 1,000 yards, and the effective range was around 400 to 500 yards. If you wanted to be a marksman, you had to be able to hit a single target at 600 yards. Wow! So they were quite accurate. They were a 57 caliber, so still quite large bullet, with 75 grains of powder. So they were very powerful, but again, single shot, so you do have to reload every time, but again, much faster. So I'll show you guys how this rifle works by firing it off a few times. Wow. What I'm going to fire off for you guys is the carbine, because I am an artillery lieutenant, so you can see my thick stripe means I'm in the artillery. These would have been used by the artillery, so because they don't need the range of the infantry, because they're operating field guns, these were more for self-defense in the case of a cavalry charge, so they had the shorter carbines. The cavalry even had shorter carbines, so that way they could shoot one-handed, because they have to have their other hand on the stirrups, and so, or on the reins, sorry, and yeah, so a little shorter because we don't need the range that the infantry would have. So I'm going to put in my plugs here, and then I'll shoot off a couple rounds. You guys don't need to plug your ears if you don't want to, though it can, it is fairly loud, so if you don't like loud noises, I recommend you do.
冚耳仔，冚耳仔。點樣可以冚到個手機嘅耳仔？呢個係一個好困難嘅問題。哦，幾細粒。細細粒容易食，食板啊你。哎呀，好驚啊！
Oh my god!
And usually, soldiers, because it was a full brass cartridge, and the cartridge was quite long, they couldn't pick the cartridge out, so they would flip the rifle over, and that would empty the shot. So I'll fire 2 more shots for you guys.
Fire!
Oh, just like Drew's torch.
但係都係一粒一粒咁拍入去咯。啊，聞到啲流亡味啊，幾開心。
Okay, that's a bad boy. But do shotgun to like just.
但係呢個可以打12嘢1分鐘裏邊，即係佢而家離開嗰個子彈包好遠啊！如果近嘅話咧，其實咧就可以好快。
And those are the rifles that we use here at the fort.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Totally did. Aiming right for the wall. So, if anyone wants, you can bring the rack on up and you can feel the weight of the
可以試下嗰啲重量啊！
So which one do you want to try? The big one? All right. So the little one. So I have to maintain control of it. You can feel the weight. Yeah, well, that's the small one too. So it only weighs like 7.5 pounds, but.
嗱，你睇到啦，嗱呢度兩支咧，就可以抽出嚟，咁就要中火藥嘅。但係其他啲咧，呢支棍棍就純粹係嚟 clean up 嘅啫，clean up 個槍管。就攞嚟中嘅。
That we have are actually
哇，仲有啲硫磺味喺度。
but this one just wasn't converted.
咁嗰邊咧就係去俾22蚊啊，俾多，咁就可以咧去射槍。咁啊，揸支槍去打仗打唔贏啊！我哋今晚就去雲吞麵鋪食碗辣椒醬。好，而家黃嘉嘉咧就試下揸槍啦，陀槍師妹啊！啊唔係喎，佢係我師姐嚟㗎，陀槍師姐。
Until World War I. So not too bad. Yeah.